I think the big thing this time of year is there is a lot of coaches who are getting in front of a microphone and giving confidence to backups. And this is the thing I always focus on. Like, I remember 2 years ago, Frank Reich, when he was the coach of the Colts, he said, coming off Jonathan Taylor's 1,800-yard all-world season, he was like, we're going to scale back Jonathan Taylor's workload. We're going to give more to Nyheim Hines. And it's not going to be a timeshare, but it's going to be more balanced. Week 1, Jonathan Taylor has 30 carries against the Texans. Like, you can say all this stuff. Let's see how you feel when it's the fourth quarter of a close game. Are you going to scale back? This year, the example is Christian McCaffrey, where Kyle Shanahan's like, yeah, we're not going to work Christian McCaffrey as hard. It's like, well, let's see. Let's see you actually take him out of a game in the fourth quarter if it's not a blowout. And then the other one for me that stood out is John Harbaugh saying that we see Justice Hill as a starter. Okay, well, you signed Derrick Henry. You brought Derrick Henry in. Is Justice Hill really going to cut significantly into Derrick Henry's workload? Let's see it on the field in week 1. That stuff I more dismiss. I think the more important stuff is who's getting first team reps. Like, that stuff is actually concrete. Like, there are worlds where, not large worlds, but there were worlds where like Zach Wilson could have been competing for the starting job and maybe won the job in Denver. And it seems like he has been relegated to like deep third string and he's just not going to sniff the first team job. That stuff is concrete. And I think you can place weight on it.
Yeah.
Matthew, you hinted at this one. The hype around Jameson Williams is, not just coming from reporters, but Dan Campbell himself. In May, he said Williams is a man on a mission. He's been the most improved player since the start of their spring practices, and now training camp has taken off. Williams looks like a different player, routinely getting open. Now, to be fair on this side, this is a player that the Lions traded a lot of assets to go up and get. They've had big expectations for him. He's had non-football things get in the way of the football side of things. Is this a player that we can start to buy into a little bit, especially in an offense that retained Ben Johnson as their play caller and has a lot of promise across the board?
And by the way, has some open opportunities, right? I mean, so you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, my ride or die from last year, but then you've got TJ Hawkinson, who's I'm sorry, you don't have TJ Hawkinson. They used to have TJ Hawkinson. Now
Sam
he's in
Laporta.
Minnesota. Sorry, a rusty offseason still. But like you've got Sam Laporta, and then kind of wide open, right? Josh Reynolds is no longer on the team as well. There's not, they're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs out of the slot again. That's one of those things, Jay. Again, let's see it when I get it for 3 plays a game, but
right.
Like, let's see it when it's like, a thing. So the fact of the matter is we've talked about this a lot. We'll talk about this again. But when the NFL schedule came out and we did our NFL schedule show, we talked about the fact that Jared Goff, I think, plays 3 outdoor games all year long. And we know how good Goff and this offense is when they play in a dome. And so the fact is that Jameson Williams, and Connor, why don't you remind everyone, but for my money, like, coming out of Alabama, had he been healthy, he'd have been the number 1 wide receiver going in that class.
Yeah, he had a shot. He definitely had a shot. And that was a loaded class. I mean, you had Garrett Wilson, who won Offensive Rookie of the Year, Chris Olave, who easily could have taken home Offensive Rookie of the Year. Drake London is in for a big year this year. And there was plenty of teams that had Jameson Williams as the number 1 wide receiver. And even with the injury, Matthew, I knew a couple teams that still had him ranked as the number 1 wide receiver. Wow. So without, it would have been a really, really big deal for him as well. So this is an offense that can push the ball. He is truly, from talent perspective, one of the better deep threats in the NFC. But at some point, that talent has to translate to actual production. And maybe this is actually the year.
Yeah, I think the other thing, too, with Detroit is that, I don't know about you guys, but at least when I think of the Lions, I think of them as a running team, as a team that is built around their offensive line and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and the 1-2 punch. Jared Goff was second in the NFL in pass attempts last year. They throw the ball a ton and they play up-tempo. They have an awesome offensive coordinator who is stuck around in Ben Johnson. So, I mean, yeah, the sneaky thing with their depth chart right now, and the team is loaded on paper, but like if Amon-Ra St. Brown misses any time, like the wide receiver room, to your point earlier, Matthew, is pretty bare. So there's a huge amount of opportunity, and there are just reasons to believe why it could happen. Like often, you get a young first round pick in third year, you expect them to take a leap for just because they haven't shown it yet. With Jameson Williams, like, he was injured his first year, hit the gambling suspension last year. This is the first season where he should really have continuity and a proper offseason building into playing in week one. And also, like, necessity is the mother of invention. They need him. They need him to be good and to be that third weapon alongside the Sun God and Sam Laporta, and playing indoors so often. Like, it is all there for him if he can take the opportunity.
Obviously, guys, running back duos is something we're going to talk a lot about this summer. And we already have a quote from Tennessee head coach Brian Callahan on the Titans running back duo. They go out and spend a lot of money to get Tony Pollard. They obviously like Tajay Spears. Brian Callahan said maybe they both play at the same time. Maybe one gets hot and you let him run. Maybe we just rotate back and forth. They're both going to play quite a bit of football for us. And I don't view either one of them as a starter or a backup. So, Matthew, this feels like one that can legitimately be a timeshare.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of it is, it's like, what's Tony Pollard look like? He did not look good. He wasn't efficient last year. Now, was that the injury, slow to recover from the injury? Was it just the Dallas offense was stuck in the mud? I do think this is, again, for an offense that we think is going to be in scoring position more often, that's going to be push the ball down the field and be aggressive, with a better offensive line, with an offensive mind, with a, offensive line coach that's as good as there is in the NFL. I have Pollard at 30. I have Spears at 31. Which is sort of, I'm sitting on the fence too until we get something. It does feel like I can make an argument for either one of them, because Spears, again, from last year and now without Henry, you could see him sort of explode, kind of like what we saw out of Tajay Spears last year. And then Tony Pollard, like, we're a year removed from everyone thinking this guy's a top 5 running back in the NFL. And so he had a bad year in Dallas and he moved on. But, there's somebody really good. Again, 2 years ago, we were talking about how explosive this guy was, and he just needs more touches, and he's going to get more touches in Tennessee. So, I'm at 30 and 31. I'm sitting on the fence, but certainly it does feel like both guys could be productive in fantasy this year.
Yeah, with Pollard, last year he broke his leg against San Francisco in the playoffs in mid-January, and then came back and was ready for the start of the season, but clearly didn't look like himself. Has said publicly, he might have even said it to me after I interviewed him, after I interviewed Puka Nacua at the Super Bowl, that he didn't feel right until the second half of the season. And sometimes guys just say that, but then you look at Pollard and the underlying stuff with him. In the second half of the season last year, from week 10 onwards, he was 4th in the NFL in PFF rushing grade. Like, it did seem like he got his explosion back. It's just that he didn't break the 70-yarders that he was breaking the previous year. So there is reason to believe that he is going to be just physically better and more effective. It's just, you just hate the situation for him because he's in this timeshare. Tajay Spears is good. The offensive line is going to be better in Tennessee, but I don't think it's going to be an above average or really good unit. So I think whereas last year, all of the context was working for Pollard and he just couldn't capitalize on it. This year, I think he's going to be able to capitalize on it, but have a worse context. So it's a lot of push and pull.
A lot of eyes on that Tennessee backfield under new head coach Brian Callahan. And now we kind of transition to where Brian Callahan came from. And that's the Bengals backfield, that they move on from Joe Mixon. They have a second-year player in Chase Brown that has a ton of talent. They bring in Zach Moss. Chase Brown, an interesting player, guys, not only from an athletic standpoint, but his final year at Illinois had 328 carries. So this is somebody, Matthew, that has the workhorse experience before, and he has taken the majority of reps with the first-team offense in Cincinnati this summer so far. But we saw a lot of great moments from Zach Moss last year. So how do we kind of break this one down?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're another week away from me flipping them. Right now I have Moss at 29. I have Brown at 33. So I'm right there. But I think there's a chance that Chase Brown is the Bengals running back you want. Like, I want to sort of see how this plays out. I know Brown is getting a lot of hype right now, but again, to your point, Zach Moss is good. Zach Moss was productive last year, and the Bengals went out and got Zach Moss. I think the concern on Brown was, can he be an every down back? Do they want to be more of a committee team? They've obviously, gone heavy with Joe Mixon last year, but this is one of the more interesting storylines of the offseason since the last time we all got together, is just sort of the emergence of Chase Brown as not a complimentary third down back, which I think most people thought that's what he was going to be this year. He was going to sort of basically the same role as last year that he had to Joe Mixon, maybe a little bit more expanded because Zach Moss ain't Joe Mixon. But I think there's certainly, within the realm of outcomes, within the range of outcomes, within the realm of possibilities, is Chase Brown as a 3-down back and a top 15 fantasy running option. If he just, pardon the pun, but takes this job and runs away with it. But I want to see a little bit more of these reports before we, and the other thing, by the way, the other thing that I was going to say is, you mentioned this, Jay, but going back to when we were talking about like how can you sift through the noise, as it were? Preseason playing time. Again, even if the first team offense is out there for 8 snaps, if Chase Brown is on the field for 6 of those 8 snaps, that tells you something. How people are used in the preseason is certainly indicative. Not always, but a lot of times is indicative of how they're thought of internally in the building.
Yeah, there's a ton of signal in that. I just wonder, Connor, what do you think of just Chase Brown's talent level? Because he was 165th pick in the draft. I feel like he got a lot of hype towards the end of last season, but he had 179 rushing yards on the season. And I think a lot of the hype was one screen pass against the Colts that he took to the house for 54 yards. But I'm not sure how much that was him and just like amazing blocking, and they just got a good coverage to run into. So like, what is his upside as a talent?
Well, I mean, the big playability that you just highlighted, Jay, that's what you love about Chase Brown, right? I mean, this is somebody that, yes, he got a ton of work his last 2 years at Illinois, but as an NFL runner, talking about 4.4 speed, he can easily carry 210, 215 pounds, great explosive scores, great vertical, and you see that, the acceleration, the ability to take off in space. Now, I think when it comes down to it, what's best for the Bengals might be a situation where that's how you want to use Chase Brown. You want to get him more in space. You want to get the stretch running game going, where with Zach Moss, maybe there's a little bit more banging between the tackles. Maybe there's a little bit more of a downhill approach. So I will be watching this one closely because Brown has the talent to carry a backfield. Now, the Bengals, understandably weren't ready to hand that baton to him last year. But if they start to lean on, hey, the big playability is just too big to pass up with Chase Brown, then he could be a surefire starter by September. All right, guys, there is Coach Speak Index, right? And then there is the Jones family index, which is a totally different sphere. So Cowboys executive vice president Stephen Jones suggested Royce Freeman could be the team's RB2. Jones said it's a great 2 to 3 combination in terms of what he could do as a backup. He's a big, thick guy, and he's a hell of a special teams player as well. Be a good addition and a great compliment to Zeke. And then we'll let these young guys, Rico Dowdle and Malik Davis, battle it out. Are we buying into Royce? One Ezekiel injury away from Royce Freeman being the guy in Dallas, Matthew?
Listen, I wish I was referred to as big and thick, so I enjoy that. But I think the 2 words that you said there in that whole quote that I think are really sort of eye-popping is special teams. No, special teams. Like, I'm sorry, but if he's going to have a significant role in your offense, it's probably not playing special teams. And I know there's the new kickoff roles this year, and that's going to change stuff. But, like, the Cowboys running back you want is Ezekiel Elliott. And then, we'll see. We'll see what happens, whether it's Royce Freeman or Rico Dowdle or Malik Davis that you want as sort of a backup where they can get some scraps. But I find it hard. I think there are questions as to whether or not Zeke will be fantasy productive, let alone 2 running backs in this backfield on one of the most pass heavy in the NFL last year. I actually like Zeke as a value this year. Again, it's going to be the Rashad White. It's going to be the Jonathan. It's going to be efficient. It's going to be 35 carries for 2.8 carries, yards per carry. But he's going to have over 1,000 yards and like 12 touchdowns a year now. Like, it's going to drive everyone crazy. But I think Zeke is going to be a fantasy value this year, and I don't care who his backup is right now.
Jay, over in New Orleans, Dennis Allen, pretty blunt in terms of his press conferences on Kendre Miller, who's dealt with a lot of injuries already in his short time in the NFL. An injury-riddled rookie season. He left the first practice of camp with a hamstring injury. Allen said it's hard to make the team when you're in the training room all the time. Now, while some tough words for Kendre Miller, their former 3rd-round pick at running back, he's got a lot of love for Taysom Hill. Dennis Allen on Taysom Hill. He's going to do a lot of stuff in 2024. Additional reports have the Saints that are leaning into the Taysom Hill experience. Jay, are you experienced? Are you ready for Taysom Hill? Another roundabout with Taysom Hill?
I can't believe we're going into year 7 of the Taysom Hill experience. He's been on the team for 7 years now. It's unbelievable. But I think they should lean more into the Taysom Hill experience, because what else are they going to do? This right now is the most, just feels like the most stuck in purgatory team in the league. And he is an element that gives them a little bit of nuance on offense. And yeah, we were talking about coach speak. Like, the Kendre Miller coach speak isn't great. That's fairly emphatic. And I think the thing with the Saints that people may forget sometimes is that, like, Alvin Kamara was a workhorse last year. He was used a ton. And while it feels that he is extremely old and he's been around forever, like, he just turned 29, which isn't young by NFL running back standards. Like, I think Todd Gurley is 29 right now. But with Alvin Kamara, so that's your bit, Connor, stealing the Todd Gurley age thing. But with Kamara, I just think it's going to be his offense. Taysom Hill will cut into some of the rushing, and then I don't think there's going to be a lot left around for Kendre Miller if he is on the team.
And you forget about the fact that Jamal Williams is still there. And that they seem to, you've heard a couple of quotes about Jamal Williams this offseason. So I will tell you that when I was at the Combine, Connor, I asked a source what happened with Kendre Miller this past year. And the source told me that just like bad practice player, just like the work ethic and the habits were not up to snuff. And so whether that's changed or not, whether he's grown and matured, I don't know. And again, it's one guy talking to me drunk at a bar. So, I'm not reporting it as news. It is, again, it's one of the pieces of gossip I heard at the camp, but just sort of, you marry that piece of gossip, that unsubstantiated piece of gossip, with sort of what we're hearing from the coach and the lack of usage on the field. And you sort of think, well, maybe there is some smoke where there's that fire.
I mean, the bottom line is, guys, we're having a conversation where they are down on a running back that they used a top 75 pick on about a year ago, and they are talking up a soon-to-be 34-year-old player without a position. So kind of speaks volumes. All right.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.